A permanent UN Security Council member, a nuclear-armed power, and America's trusted defense partner burned through 6 prime ministers in just 6 years. This rapid turnover stems from a collision with deep-seated structural failures. British leaders are hitting a wall, where their ability to govern is dictated by forces outside of 10 Downing Street. The limit of political sovereignty was reached in 2022. Liz Truss attempted a £45 billion unfunded tax cut, causing a record 44-day tenure. The bond market collapsed overnight, nearly tripling interest rates on government debt. The Bank of England was forced into a £65 billion emergency intervention to prevent pension funds from going insolvent in just 49 hours. The Truss crisis demonstrated that the actual rulers of British fiscal policy are bond market vigilantes. Elected governments can no longer maneuver without the explicit permission of global financial markets. This financial subjugation began 30 years earlier during a defining clash between a G7 state and private speculators. In 1990, the UK pegged the pound to the German mark through the European exchange rate mechanism. As the German economy expanded, the peg applied immense downward pressure on a weakening British economy. Traders like George Soros recognized the UK could not sustain the high interest rates required to maintain the peg. They built a short position of $7 billion, betting that the pound would collapse. The Bank of England burned through its foreign reserves in a single day, hiking interest rates to 15%. It didn't dent market sentiment. Known as Black Wednesday, the event proved that global capital could overpower national tools of economic control, marking the start of the constrained state. While the financial markets gained dominance, the physical foundations of the British economy were actively dismantled. A century ago, the West Midlands was the center of a global bicycle empire. Companies like Raleigh pioneered the safety bicycle, creating a blueprint for modern mass production. The massive Raleigh factory in Nottingham covered 60 acres and employed thousands. It was a repository of expertise in metallurgy and precision engineering, forming the social spine of the city. The decline began when engineering leadership was replaced by financial managers. To hit short-term spreadsheet targets, they degraded the brass heritage badges into cheap decals, and it starved specialized workshops of vital investment. In 2000, the historic Sturmey Archer subsidiary was sold for just £30 in an accounting maneuver to offload liabilities. Its world-class machinery was auctioned off and shipped overseas. Dismantling these manufacturing centers permanently erased generations of institutional memory and the social networks built over a century of production. The industrial rot left the UK uniquely vulnerable when the 2008 global financial crisis stalled the banking sector. This chart shows the cost of failing to invest in capital machinery. Productivity flatlined, causing living standards to stall. The average British worker now earns £11,000 less every year than they would have on the pre-2008 growth path. This stagnation was cemented by a decade of austerity that froze infrastructure spending, followed by the trade barriers and uncertainty of Brexit. Britain entered an infrastructure doom loop. Local city councils are declaring bankruptcy, and core systems like the NHS face multi-million-person waiting lists as facilities physically buckle. The result is a public paying historically high taxes for services that are visibly crumbling. The modern state is now paralyzed. It cannot borrow to fix the underlying rot without crashing the markets, and it cannot tax a burdened public any further. Britain's stalled economic engine highlights a systemic risk for liberal democracies, the trade-off of long-term investment for immediate political expediency. This decay often begins when parties abandon their ideological foundations. In India, post-independence socialist movements were initially defined by a commitment to foundational reforms. Over decades, these principles were replaced by anti-Congressism. The primary goal became defeating the incumbent party at any cost, rather than implementing a distinct vision. To gain power, socialist leaders formed unholy alliances with far-right groups, trading their secular and Marxist roots for a seat at the table. These parties devolved into dynastic enterprises. They now exist primarily to protect captured wealth and manage caste-based vote banks rather than challenging the status quo. As ideological roots wither into dynastic interests, the distinction between opposing parties blurs. Citizens are left with a perceived illusion of choice, receiving the same fundamental policy regardless of the election result. The threads of state rot are the same across the globe: sovereignty lost to finance, the erasure of industrial skill, and the decay of political ideology. Desperate to hide decades of economic stagnation, politicians now manufacture culture wars to fragment and distract the public. This allows leaders to seize control of first-past-the-post systems with just 25% of a fractured local vote, further detaching the government from the majority's needs. Internal instability is already eroding the global order. Liberal democracies are losing the soft power and strategic reliability required to lead. Real correction requires a 20-year economic architecture that can survive the theater of short-term elections. A nation cannot govern the global order if it lacks the capacity, the industry, and the ideological integrity to govern itself.